Hey everybody, today we are doing the intro to Peaceful Easy Feeling by the Eagles. This is a simple 2-chord progression that has just enough rhythmic complexity to still be challenging for beginners. For left-hand technique, we're using 2 chords, a D major and a G major. And notice that we are using the 4-finger version of the G major. That's because our 3rd finger is going to be used as a pivot as we move between those 2 chords. The 3rd finger is going to stay down. That's going to do 2 things. It's going to help us find our next chord a little bit more easily because we have a reference point now. And it's going to make the chord change sound a bit smoother because this note is going to continue to ring through both chords. I'm going to let you in on something that a lot of beginner guitar players don't realize, and that is that the most commonly played guitar chord is this, or some variation of that. That's because that open string chord gets inserted in between just about every pair of chords in just about every song you'll ever hear. The reason for that is it is literally impossible for us to move from one chord shape to another chord shape instantaneously, right? It's going to take some travel time for our fingers to lift off of the strings and then move to the next chord shape. So what happens when we try to hold on as long as we can to one chord and then change right when we have to get to the next chord is they get cut off right on the last strum. You hear that? One more time. There's this little bzz where I lift my fingers. As soon as I lift my fingers, those notes stop ringing and it really interrupts the flow of the song. So what we do instead, and this is a universal guitar thing, just about every guitar player does this, is we lift our left-hand fingers, or at least the ones that need to be lifted. This finger, this 3rd finger is staying put, remember? So this guy can stay, but all the fingers that have to be lifted to get to the next chord are going to lift up a little bit early. They're going to lift up on the last strum of each chord, and that's where that open string chord comes from. So this is what that sounds like in slow motion. And again. When you bring it up to tempo, it's much less noticeable. Now, you probably still noticed it just then because I've directed your attention to it and you're listening for it. But if this is news to you, if you didn't already realize this is what's happening just by nature of hearing it in the songs that you're listening to, that's proof that it works. Because guaranteed, 90-something% of the songs that you hear that include a strumming guitar are using this technique. There's one exception to this technique, and that is when you have a longer held strum at the end of a chord. If I have this strumming pattern, I'm not going to lift my fingers on the last strum of those chords because that last strum lasts for so long it would sound kind of ridiculous. That's not going to get filled in by the listener's ear. They're going to notice that. So in that case, we're just going to try to make that change as quickly as possible. And it's not a big deal because the percentage of time that our fingers spend traveling to the next chord is a much smaller percentage of the overall note that's being held because it's a longer note. So it's not really a big deal. The other thing I want to point out, and this is specific to this particular chord progression, D major to G major, is that sometimes people will, instead of lifting their fingers on the D chord and then planting all 3 fingers when they get to the G chord, sometimes people will plant their 4th finger a little early on that last strum, which sounds like this. That's just a personal choice. I actually tend to like that sound a little bit better than the open string. It's really just a matter of whether you hear the open E string in between chords or the G on the E string. That's totally personal preference. And for our right hand technique, we're just strumming, and we're doing a different strumming pattern for each chord. So the D major chord, we do down, down, up, down, up, down, up. So if we're counting that, that's going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, strumming on every count except for the and of 1. And for the G major chord, this is where the complexity comes in. We're doing down, up, down, up, up, up. So 3 up strums in a row. If we're counting that, that's going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So again, strumming on every count except for the 3 and the 4 this time. And this can kind of throw people off because we tend to use our down strums to kind of ground ourselves rhythmically. And without those down strums on the 3 and 4 counts, it can be hard to keep a steady tempo. Sometimes people are tempted to rush through those counts so they can hurry up and get to the up strums. So you want to make sure that on those 3s and 4s, you're still moving your hand down so that you have a rhythmic placeholder. And you want to move as steadily as you can. So and 3 and 4 and. You're not rushing through that. That's going to be the challenge of this riff. So it feels to us like we're in the key of D because we're playing this D major chord and this is our main chord of the song, but we have a capo on the 2nd fret. So this D major chord isn't actually a D major chord. It feels like one to us, but it's actually a D major chord that's been shifted up 2 frets. So when you shift a D major chord up 2 frets, it becomes an E major chord. So we feel like we're playing D major here. Anybody listening to us play this is going to hear an E major. And same with the G chord. It feels to us like we're playing a G chord, but what's actually coming out of the guitar is an A chord, because if you take a G major chord and you shift it up 2 frets, it becomes an A major chord. So the actual key of this song is E major, even though it feels to us like we're in D major. So this chord, our D chord that we know now is actually an E chord, I'm still going to call it a D chord because that's what we do as guitarists. We pretend like this capo isn't here and we pretend like this is just a D chord because it's a lot easier for us to understand that way. So I'm going to call this a D chord, and this is the 1 chord in the key of D. This G chord, which we know is actually an A chord, I'm still going to call it a G chord. This is the 4 chord in the key of D. So we have a 1-4 chord progression. All right, scale patterns. If you don't understand this part, don't worry about it. It's not that important for your ability to play the riff. If you're curious, you can go check out my scale lessons at my website. If not, just skip over this section. For those of you who do understand scale theory, this is a scale degree 2 major scale pattern. So we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. The scale degrees of each chord, we have on the D chord a 1, 5, 1, and 3. And on the G chord, we have a 4, 6, 1, 4, 1, 4. And chord tones. For the D chord, we have a root, 5th, root, 3rd, which is just a standard voicing of the D major chord. And for the G, we have a root, 3rd, 5th, root, 5th, root, which again is just a standard voicing of this 4-finger version of the G major chord. And now for the note names, just to remind you, I'm using the fake capo world names, not the actual note names that we're hearing, the note names that it feels like we're playing. So for the D chord, we have a D, A, D, F sharp. And for the G chord, we have G, B, D, G, D, G. So this song is played at 144 beats per minute, which is honestly kind of a fast tempo for what I think is a pretty mellow sounding song. And it just goes to show you that tempo doesn't really ultimately determine whether a song feels upbeat or laid back. It really has to do with what you're doing at any given tempo that gives a song its feel. So sometimes people think that the faster the tempo, the more upbeat the song is going to feel, and the slower the tempo, the more laid back the song is going to feel. That definitely contributes to the feel of a song, but it ultimately comes down to what you're actually doing at any given tempo rather than just strictly what the tempo is.